Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Tim Marshall. Tim is a journalist, author, broadcaster specializing in foreign affairs and international diplomacy. He has written for many of English major newspapers such as The Times, The Guardian, The Daily Telegraph, and The Sunday Times. He has published 7 books, and today we will speak about his latest book, The Power of Geography, 10 maps that reveal the future of our world. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Uh, Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thanks for a lovely introduction.
So, Tim, I'm so full of questions. I hope I can fit them in our time allowed. But can you tell us a little bit about your background? How is it that you became interested in foreign affairs, in journalism, in politics? I mean, it's so much to cover, and this is not a typical subject that people are interested in. So, yeah, tell us your background, your hero journey.
Well, it started when I was a kid, I'll tell you. I wasn't a nerd. I played football and that weird game the English play called cricket. I wasn't a nerd, but I kind of was a secret nerd because I loved books. I loved maps. I loved, longest rivers in the world lists. Even at the age of 9, I was watching the news on telly, and there was just various major events that I just was taken by, struck by, and I just had this fascination about the world. And then when I was about 12, 13, I heard the D-Day, the BBC radio recordings of the D-Day landings, and in my naivety thought that sounded like fun. Yeah, I mean, I know now it was hell, but the idea of being a correspondent, it's like, wow. Now it was a pretty weird route because I actually left school at 16 and I was basically a laborer. Well, I was a painter and decorator. But we don't have time to go into how, but eventually I managed to wheedle my way into the media, eventually became a foreign correspondent. And for the past 25 years, it was mostly conflict reporting. And so I'm one of those really, really lucky people. I got to do what I wanted to do when I was a kid.
Okay, just digging a little bit deeper into an aspect of your life, I get the sense that you are mostly self-educated, and I have been mostly self-educated as well. Can you say a word or two about the mindset of hunger, of educating yourself, not having like a structured classroom, but, just letting curiosity drive your learning?
It helps if you read, doesn't it? And of course, that takes a certain level of education, which not all of us are blessed to have. But I've always read voraciously. But I tell you what the breakthrough was, and it's a bit weird, but I stand by it. It was punk rock. Because I was a great reader, but a lot of it was, I don't know, middlebrow at best, although I'm a big fan of middlebrow. But along came punk rock and new wave and all that music in the late 70s. And there was a group, let's say, like the Jam. And they would reference in the song something about like George Orwell or the Clash. The Clash had an album called Sandinista, which was inspired by the Sandinistas of Nicaragua. Well, as you know, that hasn't gone too well recently, but we'll move on from that. And that encouraged me that if these guys, were playing this cool music, were referencing that sort of thing, I just got deeper and deeper into reading more about that, and that would get you into the Spanish Civil War. And then there'd be a film that would come out about Salvador with Gene Hackman, and, I'll watch that. And that is a form of self-education in itself. And then once you get into journalism, well, you're just immersed in stuff. And I'm a great believer that you don't need to talk the language of the high priests of whatever the subject is. It could be medicine or it could be foreign affairs. When you're explaining this stuff or commenting on this stuff to a general audience, speak English or speak Spanish, but don't speak the language of the high priests.
Okay, and now my personal interest is finance and the stock market and this
Mm.
and that, and I have like a certain routine that I go through every day to keep myself informed. I wonder, you as a person who does analysis of the world, if you have a certain routine that you follow to just stay informed of what's happening in Singapore, for example.
Yes, although first of all, I find out if something is happening there, if you see what I mean. I mean, I could actively go out and seek stuff. Well, I do. Sorry, so let me start again. Every day I will have a quick look at TV news headlines, both national and international. And a lot of the time, I wouldn't say it's always froth, but it is daily headlines that pass before your eyes and they come and go. And so most of the time, I don't think I need to know more about this. It just comes and goes. Every now and again, there's a little tiny news item. And I think, hang on, that I need to know more about. I'll give you a very brief example. 3 weeks ago, an aircraft took off from a Japanese aircraft carrier. First time it had happened since 1945. Now, that tells me something, that you need to know more about what's going on there if something like that has happened. So I scan across that. I scan across a quick bit of the internet, a bit of Twitter, see what's going on. I mean, because if there's a major world event, it's going to be on one of these outlets. And only then do I think, well, I need to know more about what is behind that. So then I'll go into it, and I don't rely on just the English as a first language. You know, I'll go to the Hindu Times, which is English language, but you know, obviously it's from a different perspective. If there's something happening in India, if there's an Indo-Chinese clash in the Himalayas, I'll have a look at Global Times to get the Chinese government's perspective, and maybe the Hindu Times to get the Indian perspective on it. Apart from that, the other part of the routine, I go to some subscription websites. You know, you pay, I don't know, $70 a year, $100 a year, or whatever, and I'll do, to use the buzz phrase, a deeper dive, either into, oh, this is happening, I want to know more about it, or just on a subject that I'm working on, a column I'm writing, or part of the book, or whatever.
Okay, and do you find that globally there's certain apathy towards international affairs? I mean, most people are just seduced by the crime that happened across the street, and you know, something that could happen in Ethiopia.
Yeah, well, I do find that, but I do understand it as well. I mean, A, people are busy. B, you know, you're worrying about how to pay the electricity bill. Why are you going to worry yourself about what's happening in Ethiopia? I do understand that. But I would also encourage a curiosity about the world. A, because I really believe that knowledge is its own reward. I mean, I come from a country, my grandfather taught in what was called the WEA, the Workers' Educational Association. This was back in the 20s, after he came back from the Somme in World War I. And in those days, there was a lot more working class people who just wanted to have classes to learn about things, just because knowledge was its own reward. You know, they might have been a miner. They weren't ever going to go off and be anything else, but they still valued knowledge. I think a lot of that has gone, which is pretty sad. So A, I would encourage people just because knowledge is its own reward, but also B, because it's a better informed population has more ammunition with which to make better choices when it comes to politics. But C, also, if you want to understand stuff, I mean, the classic example is if you're a steel worker in Pennsylvania and you're losing your job, well, all that stuff that's happening in China, actually, that's quite relevant to you. Or a more modern example now, that there is a caravan of people in Belarus, next to Russia. It's trying to batter its way into Poland. The Belarusian government is deliberately using this as a geopolitical weapon for things we probably haven't got time to go in for. But they're not going to stop if they get into the Polish border. They're going to go across into Germany, and some of them are going to come across to try to get to the UK. Now, I'm not making a value judgment on their actions, but I'm saying that if people in the UK and Germany have issues about the rate of immigration and migration, well, if you watch the news, you'll find out, A, what's happening here, and then take it even further back to where people are coming from. Then you better understand what is happening all around you.
Well, today, the world benefits from people like you who are informing themselves and then spreading their knowledge. But at one time, the British Empire had possessions all over the world. I
Mm.
wonder at that time how a politician or an investor would stay informed of whether I should buy, I don't know, a plantation of sugarcane in Barbados or invest in something in India. I mean, at that time, people didn't have the internet, and now you facilitate the flow of information. But at that time, how did people stay informed of what was happening in the world?
Well, most of them didn't, but yes, at the level of investing, we had for example, in London, we had the coffee houses, um, and they were on all the street corners in the city of London, and gossip is exchanged, and a ship comes in, and news comes off from the ship and makes its way through the coffee houses. There was, of course, the Times of London and many other newspapers, but of course, your news is often 3 months old. But you simply traded on what you knew, hence the South Sea bubble. But that's another story. You traded on what you knew. You know what? Honestly, Alan, I'm not sure that it's that different. It's just the speed. I think the rumors, the inside knowledge, the take of newspapers, influential people, latest telegrams coming in. I mean, you take it back to the time you talked about, well, then just go forward 100 years and we'll have the telegraph, and then go forward another 50 years, we'll have the telephone, then go forward another, it has got faster, but it's the basics are the same. And now you have different problems. You make your decisions in haste, in real haste, and you may repent at your leisure because, you might sell on one tweet or whatever it is. You may not give yourself time to think, you know what, I need a few more minutes because I think that everyone else is going to do X, but I think if I wait until Y, I think, you are, not you personally, but people are bounced into making much quicker decisions. Hey, I wouldn't have your job. I'd be lost.
Well, I had gotten into the habit of now double checking. At one time, I would react to the news when I assumed the news had some valid point, but now, or some valid source, but now I'm into the habit of double verifying the source and the source of the source as well.
Yeah. And also, someone just says, this sentence, and you think, wow, because it means so much. But then, whoa, hang on. You add that sentence and that sentence and that sentence, and then you've got the context that actually that first sentence isn't quite what you thought it meant. Yeah.
Okay, well, I have taken you into too many tangents already. Can you tell us what was the motivation of writing this book, 10 Maps?
Financial. No, that's only half a joke. Half a joke. I both dislike and like writing simultaneously. I find it difficult, but every now and again, you just come up with a phrase and you think, oh, hey, that was good. I mean, not everyone else might agree, but you think, well, hey, that was a good sentence, and that's fun. Also, I'd written this book, Power of Geography. Now, British reticence and we're very understated. So I modesty prevents me from telling you how many it sold. Would you like to know how many it sold?
Yes, please.
It sold 1.5 million copies around the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, over a period of years in different languages, but I thought, thank you everybody for buying that. And I realized what I'd done was hit upon a formula. I mean, happily, some people like the way I write as well, but I admit it's a bit of a formula in that I look at whatever the situation is, whatever the conflict is, or the country or the region, and my basics are looking at its geography and really trying to immerse myself in it and what will almost certainly flow from that geography. Because if a river flows in one direction, you pretty much know, especially in ancient days, which way the trade is going to go. Then I build on the history of that place, and then you build on the current affairs. And I think if you do it like that, you can actually make very, very good predictions, guesses on what a country will do if situation X happens. And the greatest example I have is, what do I think Russia will do if the Ukraine flips into a different sphere of influence? And I knew what would happen, and it did happen. They invaded parts of Ukraine and they took Sebastopol because of its warm water port. Now, not everything is as clear as that. So, and I realized that putting this context, this geographic context, alongside all the other contexts, I'm not a determinist, that it's the only thing that matters. But looking at the world from that angle suddenly gives people this framework and context to understand why stuff's going on. And I did it for the really big regions and powers: Africa, Latin America, US, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, etc. And so I thought, okay, let's look at some of the smaller countries that are having a big influence. Ethiopia, a major power in the Horn of Africa. Iran, extending its power out through the Middle East. Things like that, and repeated the formula. And hey, so far so good. It's number one in the UK.
Wow. Wow. Okay, but so we are limited by geography, and geography influence all the decisions that, not all, but most of the decisions that politicians and business people do. But now I see there is a new tendency that there are individual private companies that are becoming as powerful as nation. I mean, Facebook itself has over 1 billion followers, or I don't know. So how does that play into geography? I mean, I can earn my living from Canada. One of my biggest clients is in England and the other one in the States. So I don't necessarily have to be here in Canada.
No, but with respect, you're not normal. Not normal, that's the wrong word to use. You are unusual in that your job is like that. Now, there is this idea now that we're all internationalists, that that we can work wherever we put our laptops, but it's actually not true, because most people haven't got laptops and they can't take them anywhere anyway. I mean, that is true for the vast majority of most people in the world still. That's the first thing, and therefore geography. And, I'll be honest with you, Jeff Bezos is not that important to somebody in Khartoum living in a tiny little shack in Khartoum in Sudan. I understand the influence of the major companies. I understand that they are a challenge to some of the nation states. Well, actually, no, I don't think they are, but we could perhaps talk about that if we had longer. And I also don't think that something that was an idea that was fashionable 20 years ago, which was that the mega company would take over from the nation states in our lives. I don't think that's happened. If somebody robs your house, you are not going to call Jeff Bezos. You're going to call the police. And who organizes them? The state. Ditto, if somebody invades, you're not going to call that other Bill Gates, etc. And even at a non-conflict level, well, in my country, if you get ill, most of us are within the state health system. And so again, the state is still the organizing principle for most people in the world. So I'm afraid I push back against the question. I understand that there is a far greater number of people now who can operate on their own and who do fly over, but most of us know.
Right. Okay. Then how about the changing economic environment? Let's say Saudi Arabia, that is trying to transition away from fossil fuels. Are they going to make it?
Wow. Yeah, well, they have a chance of making it. And the reason they have a chance is that they have seen the future and are acting early. It's people that act too late that won't. I mean, the background to this, as you know, climate change is real. The Americans know it. Like many other people, they are weaning themselves off the only thing really that Saudi has to sell. Now, it's going to take 40, 50 years, I think. But during that 40, 50 years, Saudi's income is going to drop. And there's a point I make in the book is when they discovered this stuff, there was 2 million of them. Now there's 25, 27 million of them. The only thing that pays for those 27 million people to live the standard of living they're living is the stuff that the Saudi state is selling, the stuff that Aramco sells. So if they can't sell that anymore, how on earth are they going to feed these 27 million people? And they figured that out. early. So they have this thing, the Saudi 30 concept. I mean, they won't make that. It's only 9 years away, 8 years nearly. But at least they are now diversifying the workforce with more women in it, allowing women to drive as part of that, slightly, gently opening up the society. And it's not as easy as just saying open, because if you do, other people might close it very quickly, the religious sect or pillar that holds up that state. But they're also trying to get big into tourism, big into renewables. They will be one of the world leaders probably in solar power. That in itself, there's a knock-on effect to that. The Americans will not fight for Saudi Arabia's last solar panel. So there's a who do we make big friends with now? So if you want to get another guess, I guess Saudi Arabia may make friends with Israel in a few years. I mean, it's a bit of sort of, whoa, Saudi Arabia, Israel. But, the differences between them, I think, are less than the differences between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And if the Saudis continue to think that the Iranians are a threat, doesn't matter if they are or they aren't, it's about whether the Saudi perceives them that way, then Saudi Arabia will look around the world the way that the UAE has, and it'll decide we need a new big friend if the Americans aren't here. So this is what I mean partly about geography, but also about other stuff. You can make reasonable predictions, and some of those predictions I just made there are rooted in geography.
Wow. Okay. So at one time in history, not too long ago, we had these two superpower, the US and Russia, try to influence all the other countries, and now we have a new player, which, well, it's not a new player, but it's a player called China. But now I would like to see how to better categorize them, whether they are an economic rival or a military threat, as some people try to categorize them here in North America.
Yeah, well, there's always been that tension, hasn't there? That if you become an economic rival, is it inherent within it that you become a military rival? No, I don't think it is. The EU is a rival to the states economically, but it's not a military threat at all. Not just because it hasn't got a cohesive military. Even if it did, it wouldn't be a threat. I think where it becomes a military rival is as follows. Not in Latin America, not in Africa, and they're both huge rivals for the resources there and other things. They're not a rival in Hawaii, in the Eastern Pacific. Where it comes down to it is a much, and China also does not have aspirations to occupy other territory other than one place, and that's Taiwan, which is part of this equation. America needs the international sea lanes to remain open. It, at the moment, is the only one that guarantees that. If China is to take Taiwan and is to claim the whole of the South China Sea, despite the overlapping claims of those sovereign waters, it will then say, we control these sea lanes. It then has the ability to say who can and cannot. Now, America cannot allow that, because if the international sea lanes people ride roughshod over it, and this is to do with the United Nations Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, then the sea lanes are a threat everywhere. So America will do all it can to contain China in that respect. And that includes possibly defending Taiwan, because China sees a wall in front of it, of all the islands in front of it. If you take the biggest brick out, which is Taiwan, there is no containing China. Again, I am not making a case for or against this. It's just what is. So my hunch is the Americans would actually back Taiwan. But what they're also doing is making sure that everyone else, Philippines, Indonesia, Australia, Japan, India, increasingly India, post-Afghanistan, America is trying to say, we will stand by our allies. And they know that if they are seen not to stand by their allies will cave, their allies will fold, their allies will come under the influence of China. So it's not, it's about, every time you see a little thing in the news, you think, well, why are they so upset about that? Either side. It's because it's not actually about that. It's always about something much bigger. And that's what's going on in the South China Sea. It's why it's the flashpoint of the 21st century.
Well, Tim, I find all this information fascinating. I wonder, how do we get more people interested in international affairs? And I tell you, I read the Economist and the Financial Times
Mhm.
from time to time, just because I think they have a broader perspective of the globe. But in general, how can we get more people other than reading your book, which is fascinating?
Thank you.
But it would be nice to talk about all these other international affairs with regular people, and they are far in between.
Well, one way is just to find more people that, in the phrase I have, which is who speak human. There's no need to make these things more complicated than they are. But when you're talking about the foreign issues, just break it down into constituent parts, give the geographic perspective, because I find over and over again, the moment I put a map up, if I give a talk, and say, see that point A and see that point B, it just seems to become clear to people. When you put in these geographic imperatives, I'll give you an example. Put up a quick map of Japan and say it's 1936 and say that they're industrializing, and then say they have a problem. There's no rubber in Japan. What are they going to have to do? And the 12-year-old will say, well, they're going to have to go and find some rubber. And you say, and then here's where the rubber is. And they went and got it. It just becomes clear.
Right.
Stuff when you put in the geography as well as all the other stuff, and you use ordinary language and ordinary words, and hopefully you do it in an engaging manner. I mean, I even put a bit of humor in, which, that's not always easy because you're dealing with sometimes death and disaster, but you don't have to be overly portentous and serious. And so if you can have that approach, and then the mass media can get hold of that and try to push it across, then I think we would know more about the things around us.
Well,
yeah, there's a formula. I hope it works.
Then, can you tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow the work that you do?
You're very kind, Alan. It is The Power of Geography. It is essentially the follow-up to Prisoners of Geography. And I would encourage you to get it in your local bookshop that sells good books. Because it's, as far as I understand it, it's in all the big bookshops. That's great. And I'm hoping the small independents where you live are also stocking it.
Yeah, and I like to remind, if a bookstore doesn't have it, booksellers, they love to be told by the customers, hey, get this book, so just approach that bookseller and tell them, give me the latest Tim Marshall book.
And it's worth waiting 3 or 4 days for them to order it in,
Right.
It'll still be there to be read.
Tim, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.